I'm quite overwhelmed to get this opportunity to be in the on this podium, sharing podium with such distinguished personalities. I come from a center called Sitara, that is Center for Technology Alternatives for Rural Areas, which is a small academic unit within IIT Bombay. At the outset, I would like to give my acknowledgement to the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and Professor Satish Agnihotri, my head, who facilitated this, and my research student, Ganesh, who helped me to gather courage to put this presentation together for you. And he has promised that all the difficult questions that will come, he is going to handle them for me. So with that, I'll begin. So we are talking about this whole issue of energy security. And I think one of the key problems here is the access, especially considering the Indian situation. Access in the sense of access, but also if we look at access as an acronym, then we are looking for this abundant, clean, cost-effective energy systems which are going to be sustainable. So that's what we want a silver bullet to tackle this current situation with respect to energy requirement. One of the key questions that we are a group, we are trying to follow in Sitara is, we have a host of solutions which are already there at various levels of commercialization. They are proven, they are supposedly sustainable solutions, but still people are not adopting them. So what are the key issues in terms of field experiences, and what keeps people away from adopting these situations? So that is what we try to study. And the case in point here is that a large population around the world today is without access to electricity and clean cooking fuels, as you see. And it is not a very proud situation for us that India is one of the darkest spots on this map. That means we have the highest population density of people who are either using solid biomass fuels for cooking, and they don't have access to electricity. So if you look at the status of cooking energy, which is the predominant form of energy that most of the rural people need in their daily lives, we have a very grim situation here that 85% of rural and even 18% of urban people depend on solid biomass for their cooking energy, even today in 2017. So we need to handle this situation. LPG, which is being promoted, still it is just a quarter of total energy requirement that is coming to about 28% of the households. So this is what I would like to project as a map of India. This is based on the census 2011 data, which shows that what is the penetration level of LPG in rural as well as urban India. Mind you, these color codes say that those red areas are less than 40% of the households in those districts have access to LPG. Even yellow is less than 70%. So even if those are green areas, they are just above 70% households having access to LPG. So even in urban areas, you see that there are a lot of red spots and yellow spots there. And in the overall picture, we are largely red and hardly yellow. And there are only few green dots on the map of India. So we have to put this in perspective when we talk about transition to clean cooking energy, which is one of the sustainable development goals that we have. So if we say that LPG is going to be the fuel of choice where we want to move to, then transition of LPG, we have to think about there is a limited access, not only rural, but urban areas. Even if we have targeted schemes like Ujjwala, what is going to be the way to ensure that there is going to be sustainability of that measure? Because most of the time when we go to villages for our field work, we find that we have this unique phenomenon of stacking rather than households going above, climbing the energy ladder. That means they have the LPG stove, but they keep on using their good old cook stove. And then that means they keep this LPG only for emergency situations. And whether they are going to afford the refilling of the LPG cylinder, that is the next issue in line. Then on top of that, whatever issues we have been talking since morning about the long-term concerns in terms of the GHG emissions coming from this fossil fuel, because we are proposing that we transit from the biomass, which is supposedly CO2 neutral fuel, to LPG, which is fossil fuel. Then we have to worry about the GHG emissions coming from this, as well as it is an imported fuel, so that means energy security is another concern we have to address. I would like to say that we have to rethink about the role of biomass in fulfilling this in the new form. This is the age-old friend of human being. We have been using biomass since ages. So we have to look at what is the potential for improving cook stove efficiency. There have been a lot of efforts and failures, and there is a critical need for understanding what people are expecting and trying to see whether marginal improvement in efficiency can be more acceptable than radically different solutions to be offered to people. Also, biogas is another kind of a technology that has a lot of potential, but in the new form, whether we can provide it as a service to people in the form of community biogas plants and a pipe gas service, rather than every household forced to operate their own biogas plant because of the convenience issues. Another phenomena that we have been also observing is India going to leapfrog in terms of use of electricity for cooking? That has been happening in some parts of Africa through induction cooking, especially when large amount of renewables contribute to our portfolio. Maybe that is also a solution to handle the indoor air pollution and other issues related to cooking energy. So without taking much time, the other thing that I want to focus on is about rural electrification. That is the issue of access to electricity. So as you see the map, it says that more than 99% of the villages in India are electrified. But the definition of electrification is that when only 10% of the households are electrified, we declare the village as electrified. So when we want to use the lens and see how many households are actually electrified, then we have this grim picture that only 71% households are electrified. And that gives now we, thanks to the technology we can monitor the progress in terms of how the electrification is happening. And till today, we have about the huge task of electrifying 140 million households are yet to be electrified. And that is really a big challenge on hand. And we need not consider that access to electricity is not available only in remote areas. We are here in city of Mumbai, commercial center of India. And within 100 kilometers from here, we have hamlets which do not have access to electricity. And we have found many of those through our fieldwork. And many of them are not even eligible for electrification because of their existence in wildlife sanctuary areas and so on and so forth. So we have to really think about what are the solutions for these kind of situations. And this is the reality that we have in terms of the access inequality between urban and rural. This is how we have made a transition between 2001 and 11. But even now, in rural areas, we have large amount of these red spots again, which have less than 40% households electrified in those districts. And we have to really think about what are the solutions to this. So we have done some analysis in terms of taking the data from census and NSSO and trying to understand the contours of inequality to access and consumption of electricity in Indian situation. So we see that the domestic electricity consumption in India, if we think about various deciles that are the consumer groups as per the socioeconomic classes, then we see that there is a large disparity in terms of how much monthly consumption that each household is having. And if we zoom further, then we find a lot of interesting results in terms of the inter and intra-state inequality. If you look at the Bihar urban and then the 10 deciles, how far they are spread, versus Tamil Nadu, there is again, each state is having its own level of development, and it is clearly indicated in the level of energy consumption or electricity consumption that they have. I think I'm taking too much time, so I'll run through this story, but essentially we can see that as we go from northern to southern states, there is a stark difference in terms of the level of consumption, and there is a contrast between urban and rural consumption levels at households as a function of their monthly expenses or economic status. One thing I just wanted to finally do is whether we can relate the inequality represented by the Gini coefficient in electricity consumption to the percentage of households electrified in a particular state. And this is the analysis Ganesh carried out. And we see that there is some kind of a trend that we see that as the states get more and more electrification completed through rural electrification grid extension, we find that the Gini is reducing substantially. And that is, we may take it as a good sign for having a better equality in our society. It can be also related to the level of development through HDI, and as we see that the percentage household electrification increases, the HDI in some of these states is also improving substantially. So if you want to trace the overall contours of inequality, we have to look at access, availability, reliability, finally adequacy, and last but not the least, the affordability of electricity through whatever means that we produce it, but whether it will be affordable to the people to consume the electricity. So we see that if we go through the last 3 NSSO rounds, how the inequality in income as well as access to or consumption of electricity, there is this kind of a map that emerges, and we see that the income inequality has not changed much over the last decade or so, although the electricity consumption levels are improving because of various measures. So now when we want to move from the high Gini, that is the high inequality situation and low income where we are today, our ultimate goal is to go to a society which has less inequality and high income for everybody. So whether to first reduce the inequality among various stakeholders to access to electricity, or whether to first improve our economic status and increase the income. So there are 2 alternative pathways that can take us to this ultimate objective. So we need to brainstorm in terms of what is good for Indian situation. This is to summarize that we have a huge task on hand to electrify 14 crore households. And on top of that, we have to provide 24/7 service to all. That is our ultimate objective. And that is a huge task on hand. In this whole game, currently, there are a lot of mini-grids which are pitching in and providing service to remote areas. In the current policy regime, when we want to do grid extension, what is going to happen to all these mini-grids? It is not clear. I mean, we need clear policy guidelines in terms of how these existing mini-grids will get integrated into the grid extension program, or whether they will die their own death. That is something that we have to worry about. We have to also worry about the overall monitoring and evaluation of our electrification infrastructure, the way it is growing, on a framework which will look at this access and availability indices. Ultimately, the electricity that we want to provide to people should be used for productive use so that they can improve their livelihoods and incomes. So we have to ensure that adequate supply of electricity helps them to come out of their poverty trap. And that is what we need to debate about. And then whether it can be done through decentralized or centralized means, that is always an open question that we have on hand. So with that, I'd like to close. Thanks a lot.